Got it.
Hi, everyone. We decided to open the doors. We're having this amazing conversation, a pre-webinar conversation with Chelsea and Erica. And I said, let's just open the doors and let people listen in on this conversation before we officially begin. And Erica was just making a comment about what is it that people remember when they come in to a webinar like this? Do they remember you reading what's on the screen, or do they remember the conversations? And that was what Erica was just saying. And we were talking about bringing, Erica, please take over.
Yeah, I just think, and I call it an informal professional type of presentation where, this is our job, this is our profession, and we act accordingly for that, and the information is accordingly with that. And I think that's important, but I'm not a teacher. I'm by no means a teacher, and I don't know everything. I'm not an expert. This is just my field, and the way I like to do presentations is by presenting them in the same type of way, regardless of who the audience is. I want it to be in very easy to understand terminology. I want it to flow, but I want to be able to spin it back and relate it to maybe my own life or something in your own life. I think that's how you remember it. And I think that's when the light bulbs start to go off of, oh my gosh, is this something that has affected me that I didn't realize, because I went through it all those years ago, or I know somebody that's going through this, or I wonder if somebody's going through this. I think that's the important part. The important part isn't attending, right? It's what you take away from that. And if we can't give you the information in a way that you can take it away, then I think it's a waste of all of our times.
Thank you, Erica.
You're welcome.
Before I have an opinion, Chelsea, do you want to jump in on this?
I think I'm just going to mirror the sentiment. In all of my years, I think the most memorable trainings or webinars that I've sat in on, I haven't necessarily remembered everything that was talked about, but I remember the feeling of sitting in them. Whether I was bored out of my mind, playing on my phone because it was just somebody talking at me, or did I remember being engaged, and did they make jokes? Were they really personable when they were presenting? Those are the ones that stand out to me the most, that I can remember 4 or 5 years down the road. And I might not remember everything, but I know who they were, and I can look back and find the information and know where to go for the information just simply because of their personalities. And I really think Erica has a point. It's so important to be personable instead of being a robotic voice on a screen.
And how many times have we signed up to take webinars or training classes simply, I don't care what the topic is, simply because the person I recognize from the picture or the name, I remember how much I enjoyed the last one that they did, and that's when we give other people, like, oh, you should check out this one and this one. It's because of the people giving it, if I gotta feel like I'm sitting there for 2 hours, I really don't want to go.
Well, I sincerely appreciate hearing that from the both of you. I feel as if what you're doing is mirroring my feelings about doing this speaker series in the years that Jamal and I have done it, that it wasn't about how we appeared as much as what we left people with. And that sense that they participated, even though they weren't physically seen, but that everyone has had an opportunity to be seen and heard through the chat and the Q&A, and to walk away with a sense of relationship, with the speakers, that, yeah, we've all been through that. And wow, that was a good idea. And remember it even years from now. So it has meant a great deal to me to be a part of this. And I thank you for what you said. I also
Yeah,
thank
thank you.
everyone for introducing themselves in the chat and telling us what kind of work that you do. We love hearing that and seeing that.
That's what I'm looking through right now.
Yeah, I see one of our volunteers is in here.
Did
At
you?
least, yeah, Doreen.
Hey, Doreen.
A shout out to Doreen. And we're going to have, and I'm just going to tell everybody, we're going to have, at the rate we're going, we could have close to 1,000 people in the room today. And we're all very excited about that. Of course, that means that there'll be an awful lot of people that want to have something to say in the chat. And, that chat is going to race along. And so don't let that stop you. Please put your thoughts in the chat, and add your questions in the Q&A. And Jamal, how are we doing? You think we want to get ready to officially start?
Think we should.
You want to start us off?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to our virtual speaker series for 2024. Today's webinar is Domestic Violence. Everyone Knows a Victim, provided by the PA Care Partnership in association with the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, also known as OMSAS. And with that, I will turn it back over to Nancy to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Jamal. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. And some of you are going to look at that screen and say, yeah, I know them. That's Chelsea and Erica. They've been here before. And yes, they were here before. And they spoke to us about human trafficking. And we had such amazing feedback from those conversations. And a big part of what came of that were questions about domestic violence. And what we've learned from Chelsea and Erica is that they go hand in hand. And so we've invited them back today to address those issues, questions that you left with us, concerns earlier in the year. And so hopefully you'll be hearing that today if you were one of those that participated. They come to us from Victims Intervention Program, known as VIP, which is in Wayne and Pike counties. They will also provide resources for all counties in Pennsylvania, although that's not part of their job at VIP, but don't worry, we're going to walk away with something. VIP provides vital supportive services for survivors of crime and abuse, including domestic violence and human trafficking. Their mission is simple: educate, empower, envision. They educate the community on the issues of domestic and sexual violence. They empower victims and survivors to make the best choices for their individual situations and invite the community to envision a world free from violence. Erica is a medical advocate with VIP. She has a long history of working in both victim services and healthcare and has been able to see firsthand what patients and medical providers experience when dealing with interpersonal crime. She began her time with VIP in 2016 as a volunteer taking crisis calls after hours. Erica now serves as the medical advocate. She is dedicated to bridging the gap between victim services and healthcare providers throughout all of Wayne and Pike counties by adopting a trauma-informed culture and providing much-needed education on domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking issues. Chelsea is a community outreach manager for VIP. Chelsea has been in victim services for nearly 10 years. Starting as a case manager at a domestic violence shelter in New Jersey, she quickly realized that this was more than just work for her. It became her passion. She takes pride in educating the community about the complex issues survivors of crime and abuse must face every day. Everyone will leave with resources that can be used to educate others and provide resources for support available at the national and state levels and directions on finding resources and support at the county level. I ask you all to post your questions in the Q&A, which you can find by running your mouse along the bottom of the screen. And I now officially turn this over to Erica, who already has the PowerPoint slides up and ready for us to go.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Real quick, just before we get started, I am not the most tech savvy person. So if at any point, if you cannot hear, now trust me, no one's ever told me they have not been able to hear me. I'm probably the loudest person you've ever met, but please let us know. The chat always goes so fast. I'm amazed at how far and wide people have signed in from, and that's why I keep looking off the side of the screen. The webinar itself will be recorded, so it can be accessed later through PA Cares, and I believe everybody should get a link for that. But please, please let us know if you can't hear one of us, or if you're not able to see something, or there's a lag and you need us to repeat something. Please let us know. And also thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much, far and wide. I mean, never in my wildest dreams, and I'm sure Chelsea will say the same thing, did we think that little old us would ever reach this many people. And it's just amazing. It really is, further proving that I really am correct, right? Like I tell my husband, people just like to hear me. You should consider yourself lucky. You get to hear my voice all the time. Because look, there's people all over the place. So thank you all. Appreciate it. Chelsea, go for it, girl.
Okay, well, let's just get started. So before we actually start moving through the presentation, I do want to give a bit of an activation warning. And I see that people in the chat, like I wrote some down, we have some people from housing, from Head Start, from children's advocacy centers, children and youth services. There's some therapists in here, other victim service providers. None of you are strangers to trauma. So I'm sure that you have worked with domestic violence victims in the past, whether you realized it or not, or you've just worked with people who are experiencing a lot of trauma in general. And even though you might be familiar with working with trauma, please take care of yourselves today. So if there's something that comes up and it activates something from your past, or you're just having a hard time listening, please take care of yourself. You can step away from your computer, turn your camera off, turn the whole webinar off and listen at a different time when you feel a little more comfortable or safer. Or if you need to, please reach out to Nancy or Jamal, and they will make sure that they link you up with the support that you need today. Because domestic violence is a heavy topic. And like we say, everybody knows a victim. And there's a little over 600 people in this webinar right now, which means there are probably a lot of survivors in the room with us. So please take care of yourself and take care of each other today. You can, Erica's in control, so I have to tell her every time I need her to switch the slide over. So don't worry about us. Nancy already did this. I'm Chelsea Filatico, the community outreach manager, and Erica is our medical advocate. That's it for introductions. I don't think we need to go back into it. But I do want to give you a little quick background on VIP because I don't want to take up a lot of time talking about our agency specifically when we only serve a small portion of this state. We are the victim service provider in both Pike and Wayne County, Pennsylvania. So I'm currently in our Milford office. I'm like 3 minutes away from New Jersey and about 6 minutes away from New York. So we're really in like that tri-state area over here. And we work with all types of people who have been touched by abuse, whether that be domestic violence, sexual violence, human trafficking, stalking, identity theft, insurance fraud, child abuse, elder abuse, anything that you can think of that is going to have a traumatic effect in someone's life. Our advocates are here to help. In fact, the only people that we will not serve are the perpetrators of crime or abuse. And we offer a 24-hour crisis line that is answered by a live person 24 hours a day. Doesn't matter if it's 2 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday or Christmas Eve, somebody is going to answer. And we have a lot of really dedicated volunteers who help us answer that hotline. They go through hours and hours and hours of training. In fact, I mentioned before, one of them is on here right now. They answer that phone. They work with victims who are in crisis in that moment. And it's a really beautiful resource that we have to offer. We also have an emergency shelter for people that need to flee domestic violence. And we're happy to say that we also have a shelter for pets because we know that's a huge barrier and you don't have to leave your pets behind if they are unsafe in the home as well. We also work with federal funding for rapid rehousing because we know that homelessness is one of the leading causes of homelessness is domestic violence. So we work really hard to make sure that people are safely housed. We have our medical advocate, Erica, who works with our care providers to make sure everybody understands domestic violence and human trafficking and how to effectively work with victims that might come through their office. And we also have legal advocates who walk people through the legal system, which is confusing on a good day, let alone a day where you are in crisis, living your worst nightmare, and now have to fill out a 45-page protection order with words that you just don't understand. So we have people in-house that can help be the buffer and help lead people through the system. And I think one of our biggest services that we offer are individual and group counseling. This is what our advocates are here doing all day long from 8:30 to 4:30 every day, seeing clients, victims, survivors, their children, their parents, their loved ones, their aunts and uncles, people who just happen to know somebody who was a victim a long time ago and just need to process it. That's what our counselors are doing every single day. And we also have a really robust outreach program. Maybe I'm a little biased there as the outreach manager, but we do a lot of work in the community trying to make sure that everybody knows that our services exist and know that they can be a part of the solution. So that is the very rapid fire who is VIP that you are going to get. And as I said before, we work in Wayne and Pike County, but there is a program very similar to VIP in every single county throughout the United States. So whether you're joining us from PA or you're out in Michigan or you're in California, there is something like Victims Intervention Program in your county. It's just not called Victims Intervention Program. So we do have links to the statewide website so that you can find the provider in your county and see what kind of services they offer. They might have some of the same services, they might have different services. It really just depends on funding from county to county. So just keep that in mind as we go through the presentation, that even though we might be a long way from you, there are services available to you and the people you work with. And with that,
the websites for that themselves, there's those listings we will see later on at the end of the presentation, but in the additional resources that we provided, and you all got the link for that, this time around, we also put each one of those additional resources that we have listed, we put the name and link right on that as well. So that way it's easily accessible and every single one of you can find it. And the other big thing is, like, we have our volunteer program, but if this is something that would interest you, reach out to the programs within your area and ask them. So many of them have volunteer programs and they always need volunteers. So if that is something of interest to you, please, please reach out to them and ask, and each program can give you that information. Otherwise, we are going to go ahead and get started. Domestic violence. So a lot of us have heard this word, or I've heard this term, and we use it interchangeably a lot, but actually it is like an umbrella type of term is how I like to refer to it. So domestic violence is a pattern of coercive behavior that is used by one person to gain power and control over another in an intimate or familial relationship. So this is not a one-time incident. This is not, oh, I made he or she mad, right? This is a pattern of behaviors. The sole purpose of this is to gain that power and control. People that are living within abusive relationships, that relationship, and this is the hardest part, is that it's not built on love, regardless of what you are told, what you are shown. It is not built on love. It is built for power and control. The umbrella of this comes in with the subsets that fall underneath of that. So within domestic violence, you have intimate partner violence, or IPV. This is physical violence or sexual violence, including stalking and psychological aggression with coercive acts by a current or former intimate partner. A lot of the stuff that we go over today, it is going to be involved IPV because that is the biggest subset of domestic violence. Beyond that, there's also different forms of child abuse. So emotional, sexual, physical, or the neglect of a child under 18 by a parent, custodian, or caregiver that results or potentially or threatens to produce some sort of harm. There are other forms of child abuse, but when it comes to domestic violence, it is referring to the people that are in that direct caregiving role as being those who abuse the child. Also people that live within that same home because of those family ties. Lastly, we have the subset of elder abuse, the failure to act or an intentional act by a family member that causes or creates a risk of harm to an elder. The big key here is that with domestic violence, these are well-established relationships, right? Somebody that you're dating or were married to, or are currently dating or married to, somebody who should be providing that support and that love for you as a child, as an elder, as a partner. This is not stranger abuse. This is not random acts. You know, this is that pattern for power and control by those closest to you or those that should be closest to you. Come on. Moving on, we're going to do a poll. Yeah. All right. Right now, or in 2022, when the last report was done, where does the state of Pennsylvania rank within the United States for domestic violence cases? So what number is our state out of the country for the amount of DV cases that are reported? Remember, these are all going off reported numbers. So I'll give everybody a minute to answer that. Nancy, you just let me know when we're good, please.
Give it a second to.
Yep, you're good.
This is pretty good. You want to use this?
Yeah, I'm ready. All right, so we have 14% saying A, 39% saying B, 21% saying C, and 27% saying D. So pretty close ties there. Let's look at the scope of the problem overall. More than 10 million people each year are abused within the United States simply due to domestic violence. The estimated lifetime financial burden that intimate partner violence causes in our state alone is $156 billion. When we are looking at this, nobody is immune to not only domestic violence, but nobody is immune to victimizations and crime. There's nobody too good, too rich, too poor, different races, it doesn't matter. There are things that make you at a heightened risk, things such as your age or education status, race, and socioeconomic class. These are established factors that really do heighten the risk for intimate partner violence. Racial and ethnic minorities experience disproportionate rates of sexual violence and physical violence, including stalking by an intimate partner. Over 80% of Indigenous women in the US have experienced intimate partner violence and stalking. 45% of Black women have also experienced this by an intimate partner in their lifetime. That's up to 20% higher than the rates reported by non-Hispanic white women. Those with disabilities are at a very much higher risk, as well as members of the LGBTQ plus community. In fact, they are 2 to 8 times more likely to experience domestic violence within their lifetime. Those numbers, they're just staggering. At the end of the day, it comes out to 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, and nearly 1 in 2 LGBTQ plus individuals will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. More than a third of the women report coercive or psychological aggression by an intimate partner, and nearly 20% report sexual violence by the hands of an intimate partner. When we are looking later on at the different tactics of abuse, when we have intimate partner violence, 99% of the time, it includes some form of financial or economic abuse. That is the highest, most used tactic in these types of abusive relationships. Nationwide, domestic violence accounts for 15% of our country's violent crime. It's estimated that there are 20 people being abused throughout this country every minute of the day. Every minute, 20 people. And throughout each day, 3 of those people will die because of domestic violence. 20% of pregnant people experience DV during their pregnancy. The increased risks are even greater for different racial and minority groups and those under 20 years old. Homicide is the leading cause of death among pregnant people in the United States. Homicide at the hands of a partner. Women in the US are more likely to be murdered during pregnancy or soon after childbirth than to die from the 3 leading obstetric causes of maternal mortality, which are blood pressure problems, bleeding out, or body-wide infection. Pregnancy-associated homicides are completely preventable because most of the time they're linked to the lethal combination of intimate partner violence and firearms. If firearms or if abuser has the access to firearms, the risk of death goes up 500% for that victim. Pennsylvania currently ranks 27 in this country for domestic violence incidents. In one day in 2022, 3,030 victims were served by different programs throughout our state. 104 Pennsylvanians lost their lives in 2022 due to domestic violence. 54% of those were either shot, stabbed, beaten, or strangled at the hands of a current or former intimate partner. Also, Pennsylvania's version of restraining orders are called protection from abuse orders. There were more PFA petitions filed in 2022 than any other year in Pennsylvania. The PA courts recently showed more than 40,000 PFAs were requested in 22. 88% of victims who petitioned for that PFA did receive a temporary order, but only 18% were granted a final order by the judge. Anytime we are looking at abuse cases, there is a clear, defined cycle of abuse. So one of the interesting things about this is a lot of times the victim does not realize that they are a victim, right? They don't realize that this isn't normal, or they don't realize why it's happening, or they don't realize that it's happening. So it's important when we are working with victims that we really take the time to explain what this is, what that process is, and how it happens. So part of that is understanding the cycle of abuse. Anytime you have an abusive relationship, there's always that period of tension building. It causes a complete breakdown of communication. That stress builds up within the relationship, and the survivor usually becomes fearful and will feel the need to placate the abuser to keep the abuse from happening. Soon after will be the incident. It can be anger, blaming, arguing, threats, intimidation, physical, verbal, psychological, or sexual abuse tactics that are used to dominate the survivor. From there, that also causes the survivor's self-esteem to plummet. After that comes denial. The abuse is explained away through apologies or victim blaming, gaslighting, and love bombing. Oftentimes it is said that it never happened, like it's made up in that survivor's mind, or it's not as bad as that survivor is saying it is. It really wasn't a big deal. He or she just really blew it up out of proportion. Then comes the calm, the honeymoon phase, right? Things seem peaceful, maybe even better than they were before, and normal life resumes and everything is fine. The incident becomes forgotten, but unfortunately, this cycle starts back again at tension. These periods can take place for undetermined amount of times. There are most certainly cases where there is no abusive incidents for months and months, years. But then it happens again because this is a pattern. It's going to happen again. And so it's important that we recognize the cycle of abuse and where that all comes into play. When we are looking at the tactics of abuse, many abusive people appear to be ideal partners in the early stages of a relationship. So many of the general public don't understand, like, why didn't you see this, right? Well, because you didn't go out on your first date and get punched in the face, right? Or you didn't meet and automatically be told how stupid and useless you were, right? Because if you were, why would you be here now, right? It doesn't start that way. The warning signs of abuse don't always appear overnight, and usually they emerge and intensify as the relationship grows. A good way to look at it is you have to get your claws in first, right? And once you have that partner hook, line, and sinker, now is when we can start to show the power and control dynamics. Multiple times, there are many different tactics of abuse that are used interchangeably. Of course, you always have some that are used more than others, but every case is so individualized. Every person who abuses and person who is abused, everything is completely different, usually across the board. When we're looking at coercion and threats, these are things like manipulation, threatening different acts of violence or to leave, to commit suicide. That's a big one, especially when we're looking at teen dating violence, which is just early domestic violence, right? Also threatens to make different reports to children and youth or other social service agencies if the survivor does not comply. They can also use this manipulation and threats if charges have been pressed to get that victim to drop the charges, or even to make that victim engage in different illegal activities. Intimidations can be anything, something as simple as a look or an action or gesture, smashing things, grabbing them just to create that scare and that fear in that survivor, destroying property, abusing pets, including displaying weapons, right? You will probably behave a certain way if there's always a gun on the kitchen table, right? And it's so easily accessible. That's a very intimidating thing. Emotional abuse, tons and tons of put downs to make the one person feel bad. The whole goal of this is to lower their self-esteem, right? Because how can they function without you then? You definitely don't want the survivor to know not only can they function without you, but they can thrive without you, right? There's a whole bigger world outside of this abuse dynamic that you have created. Humiliating them, gaslighting them, or putting them through guilt trips. Isolation, huge, huge means of abuse and power and control. This
Erica,
is,
hold on. Sorry, before you move to isolation, we had somebody ask what gaslighting is. Since
oh,
it fits in with emotional abuse, could you just do like a quick
yes.
explanation?
Yes, thank you. So gaslighting is the term that is used, that it's a form of manipulation, and it really makes the survivor question their own sanity, question their own memories, right? When you know an event has happened or words have been said, but you are constantly told, you know, it really didn't happen that way, or you're blowing it up out of proportion, right? But you know the truth. When that continues to happen, you really do begin to doubt your own memories, your own reality, right? If you take your glasses off every single night and you put them on the same spot on your bedstand every night, and you wake up in the morning and where are your glasses? Right? And you go crazy looking through the house, like looking under the bed, over here, where are your glasses? And you ask your partner, you know, I'm not going nuts. Like, I know I took my glasses off. I know I set them there. Partner says, I haven't seen them, so that must be where they are. Lo and behold, the glasses magically reappear in that spot or somewhere you know you thoroughly searched, because the whole time your partner had taken them just to watch you go nuts, like just to watch you question your own sense of reality. That's gaslighting. And gaslighting is used in various topics. You can use the gaslighting in just about any of these. It really doesn't fit with one specific because it's used so commonly. The other big one is isolation, right? You want, or the abusive person wants to pull the survivor away from their support system. They want to control who they are talking to and how. They want to control what's being said, what information is shared. They want to limit or cut down that survivor's social circle to as few as little, if any at all. A lot of times they can use jealousy to justify their actions, right? That they don't want you to be around this person because they don't like the way they look at you, or they make me feel uneasy, or I know that he or she wants to be with you, or various things like that. It still doesn't justify their behavior, but that's how it's presented to you. Another one, minimize, deny, and blame. You know, let's just make light of this situation. Here's an idea. Let's gaslight some more and pretend it never happened, right? I'm never going to bring it up again. God knows you're terrified of me. You're not ever going to bring it up again. And if you do, I can shift that behavior onto you, because what did you do to cause me to react that way? If you would have just went to the store and came right back versus stopping for gas and not telling me, all you had to do was tell me, right? But you didn't. Next time, tell me and it won't happen. You know that I worry about you. I worry about you so much, and I just want to make sure that you're okay, right? Let's minimize it, deny, and place the blame, shift it onto somebody else. Children. Poor children. I cannot tell you the amount of times that we have seen children used as pawns in a relationship, both during, before, after divorce, custody battles. It doesn't matter. It's heartbreaking. For those of us that have children, there's really, and honestly, I can't think of what I would not do for them to keep them safe, to keep them happy, to give them the best possibility of life. And that is then used against you, right? Through guilt trips, using the children to relay messages, using the visitation times when you are having to meet and give or pick up the kids from your partner, using that as a time to harass. threatening, right, to take the children away, or even making the reports and stuff, falsifying reports, simply as a tactic of abuse. It's heartbreaking to see this, and yet it happens. Oh, Chelsea, I don't know. I would say if there are children involved in this abusive relationship, personally, I don't think I've ever seen a relationship that was abusive where they were not involved in the tactics of power and control. And that's not proven. That's just my version of it. And it's horrifying. It's heartbreaking. Economic or financial abuse, as we've said before, when it comes to intimate partner violence, this is used at some point at least 99% of the time. Things like preventing employment, right? Not wanting the partner to work for various reasons, right? Because we can minimize and deny and put it on jealousy, things like that. Not allowing the partner to have any direct access to money, right? Where you're an adult that has to get an allowance, but it's not really called an allowance. It's just for that one partner to be able to really manage the family finances, right? Because money is tight. You don't really know money is tight. You have no idea, right? You don't know how much the electric bill is. A lot of times, a lot of survivors do not even know what bank they use because they're not allowed to have any of that information. It also makes it very hard when you are thinking about leaving, because how are you going to do it, right? You have no money, you have no access to money, you don't even know where to start, right? You've never paid a bill before. When you're a full-grown adult facing some of these, what other people call basic life challenges, that's intimidating, right? How many of us would even want to say, I don't know how to do that at this point? Right? So it keeps you locked in this relationship. Lastly, using privilege. This is in means of age. It can be used in race. It can be used in gender, right? Really all across the board, because you are using your own person and defining roles to treat the other person poorly, right? Maybe because you're the man of the house, you get to make those decisions, or you are the one that is supposed to be controlling the finances, right? Maybe in your lifetime, the woman is supposed to stay home and take care of the kids, therefore not allowing her to have a job, not allowing her to build any sort of social circle or support because you should be here. There's a lot of different ways that privilege can be used, right? That head of the household, or just acting like you are superior to somebody. And it's not enough to just act it, but you constantly verbalize it, right? Again, when something isn't verbalized, you can feel it, but you're kind of like in your own mind, maybe I am overreacting, right? But when it is said out loud, there's no overreacting to that. You don't misinterpret language that is used in front of you. Any and all of these things are different ways of abusing somebody. Most, if not all of the time, they are used in conjunction with one another. Different situations calls for different circumstances. But at the end of the day, not only does the victim not always realize they're being abused, they don't understand how, they don't know when it's happened, because this is their everyday life. They don't equate these things as being abusive all of the time. And it does not matter which angle of this you come from. At any point in time in today's society, at any age, you are embarrassed and ashamed to admit these things are happening to you, as if it is your fault, as if it is a projection of you and who you are. And I'm going to pass it over to Chelsea now, and we're going to work to hopefully explain some of those myths. Once I get the computer to work, hold on.
I'll do my part when you do yours.
There you go.
Okay. So what are the effects of domestic violence? How does it affect the victim. Sorry, my chair is really squeaky. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but every time I move, my chair gives a little song. Studies show that up to 60% of women who have mental health issues or disorders have experienced domestic violence in their lifetime. And women who have a pre-existing mental health condition are 2.5 times more likely to be abused by a partner than women who do not have a mental health condition. And individuals who experience domestic violence, whether that be physical or mental abuse, they have a much higher rate of developing severe complications like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, or suicidal thoughts. So it has a lot of effects on somebody's mental health. There's also a study that shows up to 90% of women who are in a domestic violence shelter meet the diagnostic credentials or criteria, is the right word, for PTSD. 90% of women living in domestic violence shelters have PTSD. That's a really big number. We also know that 75% of survivors experience some sort of physical injury due to domestic violence, but it's not just physical injuries as a result of a physical event. There's also very physical effects of domestic violence that might not come from actual physical violence. Things like gastrointestinal symptoms, chest pain, back pain, pelvic pain, insomnia, migraines, chronic headaches. These are all very physical symptoms that relate to domestic violence. And some studies have also shown that up to 75% of people who are coming into a recovery center for substance use disorders disclose having experienced intimate partner violence before entering their rehab. And an estimated 80% of domestic violence survivors suffer from some type of head injury. And 50% of those, 80%, 50% of the 80% suffer from repeated traumatic brain injuries, most of which are going to go unreported, either unreported or unrecognized. It's really common for people to not understand the symptoms of traumatic brain injuries because who understands those symptoms besides doctors and the people that know what to look for? In the context of domestic violence, a traumatic brain injury or a TBI can occur due to physical abuse, like hitting, shoving, or having somebody's head slammed against a hard surface like a wall or a door or a table repeatedly. But they can also occur from strangulation because when we put pressure on or around somebody's neck, we're restricting the blood flow and oxygen flow to the brain, which causes severe damage. And the symptoms of a TBI can include headaches, nausea, confusion, memory loss, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, severe anxiety. All of these symptoms make it almost impossible for somebody to function on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes I think they lend a hand to being, or I should say sometimes when we're working with somebody that has a TBI, but we don't recognize that it's a TBI that we're dealing with, it can be really frustrating to work with that person because we can't understand, what do you mean you don't remember? What do you mean you don't remember what happened? This was like the most traumatic thing in your life and you can't tell me if it was in the house or in the car? Sometimes I know from our experience, and I think Erica can collaborate with this, sometimes we talk to people on the phone and our first instinct is that this person is under the influence because we can't understand them. They seem confused. They're not making any sense. And then we take a step back and realize, no, this person is probably suffering from a TBI. And it makes it really hard to have a conversation with them that makes sense. And you can go to the next page. Thank you. We also know that there are a lot of overlaying intersections to domestic violence. So I think I already mentioned this before, but domestic and sexual violence are the leading cause of homelessness for women and children in America. The leading cause of homelessness. And in case you're not paying attention, we have a housing crisis in our country. where we have a very high number of homeless individuals. You might not see them because maybe they're not just so visible living on the street in the small counties that we live in, but they are out there and they are living with friends, they are living in their cars, they are living under bridges. And it's really sad to know that a lot of them are there because of domestic violence, because their home is not safe. Mental health, we kind of already said a little bit about this, but those who survive intimate partner violence often suffer a wide range of physical and mental health problems that are caused or exacerbated by the violence that they're experiencing. Symptoms like anxiety and PTSD. And when we talk about reproduction and reproduction coercion as it relates to domestic violence, Erica said this, and I'm going to repeat it 100 times. The leading cause of death for pregnant women in America is homicide. The leading cause of death for pregnant women in America is homicide. That is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. They're more likely to die by being murdered than they are to die from medical complications during pregnancy, like hypertension, hemorrhaging, or sepsis. They are more likely to die from an intimate partner than pregnancy-related causes. And 40% of pregnant women who have been exposed to abuse report that their pregnancy was unintended, versus the 8% of people who are not abuse victims who have unintended pregnancies. Hold on, I'm just trying to get my notes together. Young women, and when I say young, I mean 15 to 20 years old, about who have been abused by a boyfriend are more likely to have forced intercourse without a condom, meaning they might not want to have unprotected sex, but they are pushed into having unprotected sex by their partner, which then leads to unintended pregnancies. And when we talk about substance use disorders, we also, I mentioned this in an earlier slide too, about 75% of people that come in for intakes in recovery centers or rehabs report being victims of abuse. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So, increased risk for the outsiders. And when we say outsiders, we're talking mainly about first responders like our police, EMS, or people like us in this room, people who happen to come in after a crisis, whether it be children and youth, or we are advocates and victim services, behavioral health specialists, therapists, whatever you may be. We're going to count you under that stranger intervention category. So there are several factors that make domestic violence highly dangerous for first responders. And if we look at police first, domestic violence calls are some of the most dangerous calls that a police officer can respond to. Absolutely the most dangerous that they can respond to. And there are a few reasons for that. One, you as the police officer, the first responder, are trespassing. And I'm using quotes because that is probably how it's being looked at from the abuser's point of view. You are now coming into their private home. You're setting foot in their domain, and it's like an invasion of their privacy, right? So now you are coming into their private space and you're bringing a very public face to a very private matter, because this was only in the home and now you're going to come in and now everybody's going to be involved when I could have handled this on my own. And that is the thought process of an abusive person. And as a first responder, you are coming into an incident where emotions are already extremely heightened, extremely elevated due to whatever confrontation was just going on. And now you are coming in and everybody's already at their boiling point, if not higher. And here you come. So it can be a very, very dangerous situation. Not to mention that you don't know the person that you're walking into. So we don't know if this abuser has a past history of threats against law enforcement. And now here comes an officer, here comes two officers, here comes two squad cars. That can be very triggering for somebody who hates police. And now they are going to escalate the situation because they are just annoyed that you're there in the first place. You don't always know if they have weapons on them or in the car or within reaching distance. You have no idea what you're walking into, and these situations are very, very dangerous for our police officers who are just trying to do their job. With that, most, if not all, police officers are trained to do a safety assessment with victims while they are on the scene. It's called a lethality assessment. It's called the Lethality Assessment Project, and it's a questionnaire with just a few questions that police can ask in a very specific order that help them recognize who is at high risk of potentially being murdered. And this project came out of studies. Oh, Erica, you might know better than I do. I think that came from like the 80s, like studies in the 70s and 80s that showed us upwards of 80% of the people who were murdered by their partner had never had contact with a victim service provider like VIP. And whether they didn't know that VIP existed or they just could not physically make a call or get to their service provider because of the control their abuser had, we're never going to know because they're not here. They're not here to tell us. We've already lost them. So when the police officer comes on the scene and they do the lethality assessment with the victim, the procedure is to immediately on the scene call the victim service provider. So call VIP while you're with the victim, at least make sure that they understand that there is a program like VIP that exists to help them. Because now we can at least cross that first part, that first question of did they know we existed, off the map. They know we're here. They know there's somebody that they can call 24 hours a day. There's a safe place for them to go if they choose to. There are people that care about their safety and want to see them thrive. They know that we're here. So that's a really important thing for police to do. And we're happy that we have a lot of buy-in from our local police departments. When it comes to EMS, even though they are not necessarily the people walking in ready to make an arrest, right? They are there strictly to provide medical care. And it may not seem like a big deal, but it really changes up the dynamics of the situation when they walk in. So they might be seen as a rescuer as sorts. And now they are giving medical care to the victim and have chosen a side in the abuser's eyes. And that greatly changes the dynamic of the relationship between the abuser and the victim, and can get very dicey, and it can escalate things by no fault of the first responder. So it's definitely something to be aware of if you are an EMS and you're on here and you don't really think about it that way. But the primary goal for anybody coming into these situations is your safety and the victim's safety and the safety of everybody on the scene. And if you are somebody who is intervening and you're a stranger, so you're anybody else on this call, like an advocate or somebody making a home visit for some reason, just remember your safety is the priority and making sure that everybody else is safe and that we don't escalate the situation in some way. So finding reasons to keep the abuser in your line of sight at all times, creating distractions to take any kind of concentration off of the victim or the children if they're in the area. Don't go in alone. There's safety in numbers. Get some backup. Make sure that you're not walking into a situation that feels unsafe without anybody by your side. And just make sure that you're always keeping safety at the forefront of your mind. The one thing that I think we all, as advocates, tell our clients and anybody that we're talking to is that your intuition is your best tool. If you're walking up to a scene and you just have that gut feeling that something doesn't feel right, something's off, or you have like that sense of doom in the back of your head. I don't know if anybody else has ever experienced that, but you know something is going to happen. Please trust that. Trust your intuition, trust your gut, and stop and don't go. Don't go in if you can help it. Don't go in without some kind of backup, just so that you don't put yourself in a situation that could have been avoided. You can switch to the next slide. Sorry, I keep forgetting that you're in control. Okay, so what is the reason most victims choose to stay in an abusive relationship? Nancy, you're up with our second poll.
Okay, let me get that poll.
I just got a question here. It says if a child at a young age witnesses DV in their home, but maybe doesn't realize what fully happened, could they also become an abuser later on because they think it's normal that they see their parents in that situation and a learned habit? Is there a statistic for this? Well, yes, there is. So that was something else that we were going to be going over. But while we're doing the poll, we might as well use that time. There's a big relationship between victims and offenders, right? And it's not just with domestic violence, but it's really with crime in general. So crime victims do not always become offenders, but most offenders have been victims in the past, especially when we're looking at violent crime. Almost half of the children and their caregivers that report being victimized report multiple direct victimizations within that same year. 60% of women involved in the human trafficking or in the sex trade report current or former history of intimate partner violence. 70% of them were subjected to physical violence by their trafficker, and the violence increases over time. Half of all sex trafficking victims were first exploited by their intimate partner. But for children, there is specifically, I know I do have information on that. Let me find that exact thing and I will talk about it in a little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sounds good. Okay, so results are in. What is the reason most people stay in an abusive relationship? 15% said preserving the family unit, 30% said economic, 55% said fear, and 0% said pets, safety of pets. That shocks me, but I get it. And I'm happy to tell you that you're all wrong, and you're also all right. So if you can just go to the next slide. It's all of them. There is not one reason why people stay in abusive relationship. There are 1,000,001 reasons why people stay in abusive relationships. And I think one of the most frustrating questions that we hear all the time is like, well, why didn't they just leave? Why didn't they just go? If it was that bad, I'd pack my bags and be out of there. But it's not simple. Domestic violence is such a complex, just built on so many complex layers that you can't just get up and walk away, because not everybody has a place to go. Your options are to be homeless. And then if you're homeless, can you take your kids? Are you going to live in your car with your kids? You don't have a job. You don't have childcare. How are you going to pay to feed your children? How are you going to pay to feed your pets? How much longer can you keep that car if you don't have money to pay for your insurance or pay for the car payments? How are you going to eat? What are the repercussions going to be if you do leave? Just because you've left the relationship does not mean that the abuse stops. There are so many reasons why people don't leave. Fear of the abuser is definitely one of them. We know that the risk of homicide increases tenfold while somebody is planning to leave. And that could be because, like Erica said before, domestic violence is all about control. And when an abuser knows that that their victim is getting ready to leave, they are losing control, and that sends them on a spiral. So it becomes extremely dangerous for somebody to leave an abusive relationship. And that's why we will always ask people in your professional career, while you might be helping a victim of domestic violence, we might believe that the best thing for them to do is leave that relationship, but please note that you are not the expert in their relationship, and forcing them to leave could put their life at more risk. So if they're not ready to go, please do not push somebody to do it. Make sure that they know all of their options, and that when they are ready to go, be there to help guide them. But we cannot force people to leave, because leaving could mean death for a lot of survivors. Some other reasons that people don't leave include losing access to medication. If they are ill or they're on constant medication that they don't have access to, you can't leave without it. You can't leave without it. If you, again, we said homelessness. If you're going to live in your car with your kids, is that the next best thing for your children? And if you do that, who's going to say that you get to keep custody of those children? Because now if your abuser takes you to court and you are homeless, they have a home, they have beds for your kids. So you're still going to have to share custody, if not lose custody altogether. That is a very big fear of a lot of our survivors that come into our office. And believe it or not, you can still love your abuser. It is extremely common to feel that you love the person who is hurting you and you don't want to leave the relationship. That's not always the goal. Sometimes people just want the abuse to stop, but they don't necessarily want to leave. They don't want to end the relationship, which is valid. And we're in no place to judge because we're not in their shoes. So we will never push people to leave or to break off a relationship until they decide that that's what's best for them. Some people who are, are survivors who are also immigrants might not have access to any of their documentation, and they fear being deported if they leave. Very true fear, very valid fear. Fear of being outed if they are LGBTQ plus and they're not openly out. Fear that their abuser is going to out them to their job, to their parents, to their friends, to the community as a whole. If their abuser is somebody in authority, if there's somebody who's really high up in the community, maybe they are in the local government, or maybe they are a police officer, or they work at the local jail or prison. That's a scary situation to leave. That's a lot of light that's going to come back onto you. Religious beliefs, community beliefs, cultural beliefs, they all keep somebody in a relationship. So next time you hear somebody ask, well, why didn't they just leave? Please remember the slide with 800,000 words on it of why people don't leave, and help people understand that it's not just a simple get up and go type of situation. Help people understand that there are a lot more clouded layers to leaving an abusive relationship than just walking out the door. Erica?
Righty. Sorry, I was answering a question while you were finishing up. So one of the things that we have gotten quite a few questions on is how to help. So we are going to go over that as well. But I do just want to put out there, in order for the abuser to be helped, you can equate it just like to a drug problem. They have to recognize it as a problem. Nobody else can help them besides themselves. There are different batterer intervention programs. Hands down, it has to involve some sort of counseling, because this is their thought process, right? This is the way their brains are wired. And typically it does relate back to their own childhood or trauma or something that they've went through, or just the ways and ideas that they were raised with. But it took them how long to get to this point, right? It's not an easy thing to just reverse all of it. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of counseling and therapy and a lot of professional help. But hands down, there is nobody that can help anybody with a problem besides themselves. So along those lines of how to help, something that we are posed with a lot is, if you suspect somebody, or if you know somebody that close to you is a victim of domestic violence, I will tell you right now that starting that conversation is the hardest part of having it. These are not easy conversations. These are not prideful conversations. These are not a conversation that any one of us ever want to have with somebody close to us, let alone anybody, period. But starting the conversation is the single most important and hardest step. It is important to recognize that when a victim does talk to you, they are trusting you, right? They have, whether you've asked them and they've chosen to be open and honest, or they have just come right out and said it to you. They are really putting their heart and soul into this. Do not dismiss what they are saying. even if it sounds hard to believe, even if it sounds completely outlandish. It may seem like this is a given, right? And that everybody should do this anyway, but it's not something that's usually done. And it's absolutely critical. When your loved one shares that info with you, they've chosen to trust you with something that's completely terrifying. Do not violate that. It may be difficult to withhold your feelings about the subject, right? To withhold your anger towards that abusive person or whatever. But it is paramount that you put your feelings aside for this. It is paramount that you understand how you respond, your body language, your tone of voice, the words that you use 100% determines if that survivor will ever speak about this, not only to you, but to anyone ever again. You cannot tell them what to do. As Chelsea was saying, they are an expert in their own life, just as I am is in mine, and just as you are in yours. There is no gold standard here on what the best option is. For some, the best option is to leave. For some, the best option is to stay. The best option is to stay alive. They know what's going to make that happen. You need to accept their answer with how it is given. You cannot tell them what to do. I like to frame it in a way of, look, my job is to give you options, right? Explain options or resources. You pick, and I'm right there, right? But my job is not to lead you down that road. My job is to present you with your options, and you pick the road that's best for you. And right now, that road may be different than what it is in 6 months. And then in 6 months, we'll revisit it, right? We can change it because it's constantly evolving. It's constantly changing their entire situation. So really accepting whatever responses that they provide. After you have this conversation, your main job is to keep the lines of communication open, right? Most of the time, and I'm not going to lie to you all, most of the time, when you stick your nose in someone else's relationship business, most of the time, it will make things harder for that relationship. And I'm not going to deny that. But what I can tell you is you cannot pretend like it didn't happen. When you are aware, when you have recognized, it is not going to go away. And that person, that survivor, is so isolated and so alone. You have no idea what picking up a phone and just texting hello can mean to them. Just to know that somebody out there still cares. Just to know that somebody out there loves them or is thinking of them or cares about them. A lot of times, the end result that you get is not going to be what you think is best, right? But it took them a long time to even acknowledge that this is what's going on within themselves, let alone out loud. And a lot of times it's just planting of that seed, right? When someone knows and really feels cared about, that's how self-esteem grows. That's how self-worth grows. To know that you aren't alone when you have been told that you are alone for months on end. That's what's important here. You want to have this conversations like in neutral locations, right? So where it's not threatening in any way, or it's not the worry of, is so-and-so going to walk in? For the love of all that's holy, ask them one-on-one in private. We never have these conversations, whether it's in our personal or professional lives, when somebody else is around, even if it comes to children, right? Because there are a lot of parents out there that do not want to admit this to their kids, and I can't blame them for that, right? You want to ask open-ended questions, and mostly you just want to listen. You don't usually have to say much. Get the conversation started and listen. Always remember that there is love in that relationship, right? The person who chooses to abuse does so for power and control, but the person being abused loves all or part of their partner. And if you go in this, let's just say it balls to the wall, right? And you are ready to, have this stop, and that's not going to end well for you, right? Do not put down their partner. Do not focus on your feelings about that partner, right? Come from a place of observation and concern, right? Let them know, hey, look, I noticed the other day when we were together, your phone rang 12 times. Is everything okay? Is that normal? Is that is that okay with you? How do you feel about that, right? Do not go into this saying, well, he or she calls you 18 times and it's annoying, right? They're horrible to you. That's not going to end well for you. Focus on specific behaviors that you see or situations that cause concern, and let them know that you're concerned. You have every right to feel the way that you feel, and you have every right to need to process that information, right? And everybody has feelings, but right there in that conversation, that is not the time for you. That's the time for that survivor. And you can wait until afterwards to process and recompose yourself. But at that point, it is of the utmost importance. And this is whether you are dealing with men, women, children, adults, it doesn't matter. Basic humans, right? We are all the same, and we all need the same things. And if you come at somebody from a defensive stand, you're going to get defensive. You're going to get lied to. You're going to get told that nothing is wrong. Once you have the conversation,
Wait,
or if you are, did you need to say something, Chelsea?
yeah, I just want to call your attention to the time because we only have 15 minutes left.
Okay. Yep.
So just so that we have at least like 5 minutes for questions and stuff at the end.
Perfect. Thank you. Once you have this conversation, or in your professional life, right, you have these conversations, it doesn't matter. Number one thing, again, is not for the person to leave. It's not this, it's not that. It's that person's safety, right? Understanding that the word safety and sense of safety is different for everybody. Every one of us looks at this differently. But also realizing that a safety is very individualized, right? It constantly changes and can evolve. It has been proven time and time again that when a person decides to leave a violent relationships, they are at their most vulnerable, and their chances of being injured are increased exponentially, right? It's important that when we are doing this, we're talking about what is the safest for you and when. What does that look like? Overall, basic safety planning tips. Within your resources, there is, I did place information regarding safety planning that can kind of go around to everybody in this situation, with little tweaks here and there. But we always try to stress the fact of having a go bag, right? Just in case things do get out of hand, right? That you have a bag that is easily accessible. Maybe it's not at your house. Maybe it's at your parents' house. Maybe it's in the garage, but inside that bag, there are important documents that you need. There are basic toiletries, cash, there are medications, things like that. Always just having that on hand. Also within that go bag, if you have children, you need to provide a little more, have some diapers, have some bottles, formula, change of clothes, something to keep them busy, maybe a favorite toy or a blanket. Just something that if you need to protect your child's life, that you can get up and go. Outside of that, okay, so what are things that we can do to keep you safe while in the relationships, right? There's different avenues, whether we're keeping you safe at home, but you need to keep in mind that violence often will escalate in both frequency and severity, which is why that go bag is so important, right? Always being aware of your surroundings. Are there weapons in the house? Code words, these are a big one, right? Because a lot of times, especially with children see this stuff happening and they want to fix it. They want to get right in there. It is so important to tell our children, number one, do not intervene, but have a code word established with them so that they know if their word or code phrase is it's snowing outside, right? While there's this heated altercation going on, they know that means I need to leave the house and go over to the neighbors, right? The neighbor knows the same thing. Or if you text somebody close to you and say tennis and that's it, they know they need to call 911 for you. You know, different code words for people that you trust. Always practicing these plans. As far as emotional support groups, identifying positive coping skills, really working to identify your feelings and sort them out, but also to process the trauma. Listen, so many of our clients that we work with every single day still are in their abusive relationships. They haven't left. They're never going to leave. And that is okay. We will focus on what will keep you safe while you are there. That is fine. Otherwise, there's always, we could go on and on with a whole webinar about safety planning, right? Changing different passwords to different accounts, making sure that you do have like cash and stuff saved up, different forms of communication, support systems, social networking sites, making sure of the apps and whatnot that are on your phone, talking to the office of your work or building security to let them know what's going on, things of that nature. Like I said, more of that information is in the resources as well as all of these websites. A lot of the statistics that we went over today are all from these websites and different, the different reports that are on there. Again, these things can happen to anybody, any gender, any race, and they are perpetrated by anybody, any gender, any race. So please look into this more, find the program that is near to you, reach out to them, look for different volunteer opportunities, look for different events that they are involved with and go and support them. Spread the word, right? Knowledge is power. We all know this. Knowledge is a huge liability because now that you know and you are aware, if you do nothing, if you say nothing, then you are complicit and part of the problem. Every single one of you are more aware of this issue and what is going on. Now it is up to you to take that knowledge and spread it out, right? Make sure that other people know how big of an issue this is. Make sure other people know what signs to look for, as well as what they can do to help. I will also make sure that I do send to Nancy some specific, I'll send the specific TBI, the helps tool, because a bunch of you had asked about that, as well as some resources specifically for children, because especially I believe when it comes to animal abuse, it said 90% of the time in those power and control dynamics, the children are present. And if you don't know, because you're isolated as a child, the only time or the only thing that you can compare your life to is your own. You don't know until you go to a friend's house, and you say, oh, wow, so-and-so helps cook or this or that. And you realize this isn't normal, right? And you start putting those pieces together. So I'll definitely make sure we get some of that over to Nancy and spread out as well. Now, I think we are good on the presentation piece with the last 5-10 minutes, I believe. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. And in the future, if there are additional questions, please, anything that you missed from today or need, reach out to Nancy or Jamal. They are able to get in touch with us and we'll do what we can.
Thank you, Erica and Chelsea. It was you guys are just amazing. And I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to bring you back today to talk to us about this extremely difficult topic. And I just want to assure everyone here that I've posted a few times in the chat the link where you can find the resources that have been shared. I know that Erica is going to be sending me some more. I'm going to go through the chat where there are some others that were added by the audience that we might want to include, and we'll update the resources that are being provided with them, and that'll be posted on that webpage. You all will receive an email when the recording from today is posted, along with those resources. So just by being here, you will be notified and we'll be able to find them. And thank you all who participated, all the amazing comments, thoughts, suggestions in the chat. And I had talked to Chelsea and Erica before we got started about this one article that I read today in the Atlantic and about domestic violence. And can we remove the PowerPoint from the screen, please? That this, now that we're doing a webinar on domestic violence, everywhere I turn, I'm seeing something about domestic violence. But as I was listening to today's webinar, I realized why this one struck me so deeply, and it is because of personal experience. It was talking about how you may have a friend, a family member, a loved one that is in an abusive relationship, and that it may be easier for you to just step away and leave them than to put yourself in the middle of it, to go and visit them while their abusive partner is in the room. And it can be very difficult to do that. It can even be dangerous. But when someone you love is being abused, your visits are no longer about what you get out of a visit socially or emotionally. They're about what you can do safely to help your loved ones. And this definitely includes the children who, because the children as victims, are actually sitting at the feet of their abusers and being trained how to be abusers when they grow up. And I've experienced this. I'm sure I'm not the only one. And so I would ask anybody out there that it may be hard, but with help, please find ways to support those who are in abusive situations. And there was also a question in here about certificate of attendance. That's part of the evaluation. When you finish the evaluation, there's a link for that. But if anybody has any problems or questions about that, just contact me directly and I'll help. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to you guys. I know we don't have time for more than one or two questions, but please, let's see what we can get in.
Okay, so real quick, I do see somebody who asked a few different times. They said, I'm seeing somebody who's experiencing verbal and emotional abuse by her husband and has children. Do I need to report this to Childline? My advice would be to this person, please talk with your supervisor about it, because while we are all mandated reporters, there are different reporting processes. So for us, I will tell you that in our situation, if I was counseling somebody who was experiencing emotional and verbal abuse and they had children, that would not be necessarily enough for us to make a report to Childline. If there was ever abuse directed at the children directly, or there was a violent incident where the children could have been harmed, or they're driving erratically with children in the car, that changes things drastically. So we can't tell you to make a report, but your supervisor absolutely can help you figure out what the best course of action is. And we will also always say, when in doubt, report, because we don't want to leave children unprotected.
Charles, do you want to, I was just gonna type in there was someone that asked about shelters that accept pets. That is each shelter or each program. So again, if you reach out to the program that is within your area, I mean, you can reach out and just ask them these questions because they usually would have to partner, right, with a shelter of some sort for the pet, but they can let you know that. It would be great if all of them did. But I could tell you ours does. That's all. It really just depends. And the other one about, you know, the person that if someone chooses to tell somebody that just does not respond well, how to encourage that survivor to speak up again. And it's just building up that trust and establishing that rapport with that person. It takes time, right? It takes that security of friendship or of trust to be built, but there's nothing that's impossible. Once, if you are able to show that you are in it and you're in it for them, we definitely encourage you to keep trying because that's just another person that made them feel unsupported. But it only takes one. It only takes one person to care to completely change somebody's life.
I will also touch on the subject of men as victims because I did see a lot of like back and forth in the chat about men maybe not being able to access services the same way women do. And that is 100% true. I will never take that away from anything. It is so much harder for men who are surviving domestic violence to access services. And there's so many reasons for that. One, society as a whole, we don't think men should be victims, right? Like we still have these gender stereotypes where if you're a man, you're not going to be abused by your wife. Like that's just not going to happen. Man up, toughen up, like, take control. And that's just such BS. We have so many men that walk into our office day after day and they're like, I don't know what to do. I can't fight back because then I'm looked at as the abuser. Nobody's going to believe me. Nobody's going to grant me this protection order because I weigh 250 pounds and she weighs 110. But it's just so common. So please, I will tell you again that if somebody is disclosing to you, man, woman, non-binary, we don't care who they are or their sexual orientation or their gender identity, please believe them. Because I saw somebody say in the chat too, it's one of the most embarrassing things that somebody can do to come forward, even though it shouldn't be. It is. There is this shame that comes with disclosing that you're a victim, and if somebody's going to take the courage to do it, please believe them. Please point them in the right directions.
Yeah, especially for male victims, that shame and courage. I mean, that I often say it, I can't imagine.
No.
I just can't imagine.
No. And at VIP, all of our services are for everyone. We don't discriminate based on gender or sex. So everybody can come in and get the same exact services as everybody else. But they don't, I think it's harder for people there's more shame in it if you're a man and you're coming forward. And you might not think that we do serve you because when you hear domestic violence shelter, the first thing that you think of is a woman. And it's just something that we work really hard to change and try to educate people more on how our services are for everyone.
I appreciate y'all answering that because I was going to hop into that conversation, but I decided to kind of step back and I was like, because it's very much a perception thing also, when it comes down to men who experience domestic violence. And it's just like that with anything in the way that, you know, systems are set up and all of those things. There are some in some specific areas where men aren't as favored as they are in others. And I think, you know, the perception that men have, you know, so many other areas in which they don't have the same barriers that women have, that in others they don't really look at them as much. So again, it's that societal perception, all of those things do matter. So it's one of those things that I think when you look at it, like you all said, it doesn't matter, man, woman, non-binary, no matter who you are, how you identify, just believe them and try to get them to help as much help as you possibly can.
Yeah, it's not your job to investigate. It's not your job to say right or wrong. Stay in your lane.
Yep.
You know, let the people who are supposed to do the investigation investigate, and beyond that, that's all, like, that's all that's required of you.
Yep.
But I appreciate your input on that for sure, because you're exactly right.
And I know that you're typing out an answer here, Erica. Somebody asked if there are specific services for trans people, and there definitely are. And I do not know them off the top of my head, but I will find them and make sure that Nancy gets them so she can send them out.
I'll write it down here. I'll put it on my list.
Yeah, some of them may be more localized. Like I know here in Pike County, we're really fortunate because we have a group called Triversity, which is very specific to the LGBTQ plus community. But I also know that our advocates, when they come on, we have to go through a really intense, like 2 weeks of training. And a big portion of that is training us on how to work with all different types of people, people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus folks, because they experience a very similar power and control wheel when it comes to abuse, but there are also added layers to their power and control and the different tactics that abusers will use to control an LGBTQ plus victim. So there are programs out there. I just don't know them off the top of my head, but we will make sure that we get them.
Yeah, really depends on the services available in your county, but nationwide, the Trevor Project is an excellent place for services for people of all different types in the LGBTQ plus community. So definitely checking them out online too.
Mhm. Yeah, Trevor Project is a great one. Thank you for that. I really hate to say this, but we've run out of time. Actually, we're over time. And I wish we could just continue this conversation. But let me do my job, which is to say that we have 2 more webinars coming up in this grant year in the next 4 weeks. And one of them is championing, oh, this is a mouthful. Championing cultural and linguistic competency, addressing behavioral health issue disparities in Blair, Delaware, and Greene counties. That's coming up on July 25th. And we have another really great one that's coming up on August 5th. For us, that is the LGBTQ plus community, focusing on the needs of youth and young adult males. That's on August 5th. I just put a link in the chat that'll take you to both of those webinars. If they look interesting and you want to join us, I hope you do. Again, I'll say how extremely grateful I am, and how I believe that we were so fortunate. And I'm going to give Larissa Kimball another shout out for introducing us. And in saying that, I want anybody that's still listening to know that you can reach out to VIP. You'll have that information. And who knows, maybe bring them in to speak to your group. And so I'll say thank you and turn it over to Jamal to close us out.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Chelsea, for another wonderful presentation. Thank everyone who joined us as always. And with that, I wish you all a great day, a wonderful week. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Stay cool. And we hope to see you during our next webinar. Until then, take care.
Thanks, Jamal. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.